everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to this review, kind of an off-the-cuff review. It's not going to be super structured. A review of the iZotope NEUTRON 2 plugin. I've been an iZotope plugin fan for years. I really got into the original version of Neutron when it first came out. I've used Ozone for mastering for years and years, and I'm really a big fan of a lot of their restoration tools as well. So when iZotope approached me a couple months ago to do a review of Neutron and the new version of Neutron, Neutron 2, and also the new version of Ozone, Ozone 8, I was very happy to do so because I've been a customer for years and I love their plugins. Neutron is a little different than other plugins. It's almost like an advancement to their Nectar plugin that they used to have as a suite of plugins within a single container. So within this one plugin, there's all these other plugins that you can use. And you can use them as individual plugins as well. But really, the whole Neutron experience is using all of these plugins, or some of these plugins, in tandem. I've already done a bunch of Ozone videos, and I'll continue to keep doing Ozone videos, but I finally, after a couple months of working with Neutron and mixes, finally gotten around to doing a review of it. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm working on a mix here. I've got most of my instruments summed down to track stacks and Logic, and I'm using the summing stacks. So let me play you a little bit of the song. I'll play a little bit of like the first verse and a little bit of the chorus and let you hear what it sounds like. I've got most of the individual instruments the way I want them, but I want to do some bus processing with Neutron on these summing stacks, and that's the main thing I like doing with Neutron. You can use it for individual tracks, and I do use it for individual tracks all the time, but I really find that Neutron shines as a bus processing plugin because it's not quite as CPU intensive as Ozone is. And as much as I love using Ozone plugins for bus processing, I find that Ozone really shines as a mastering plugin on the final master. Considering that if I use too many iterations of Ozone, it tends to freeze up my session. So let me play a little bit of the song I'm working on here, first verse and a little bit of the first chorus. So the mix right now is kind of tinny. I like the way most of the instruments sound individually. I just want overall there to be a little more impact and punch in the drums. I want the vocals to kind of stand out a bit. I want the guitars to be a little beefier, the bass to be a little beefier. There's some guitar solos in there as well. So let's start with the drums. I've already got Neutron loaded on the drum track. Let's just pull up a little loop of this here. So Neutron sort of claimed to fame as this track assistant. And a lot of people, they really take this track assistant feature the wrong way. They look at this as a way to essentially auto mix. You know, I can just hit the button, it'll automatically mix for me. No, what it does is kind of like with Ozone's track assistant. And by the way, Neutron came out with the track assistant before Ozone did. But anyway, kind of like Ozone's track assistant that I showed in another video, it's not a way to auto mix. It's a way to get a good starting point, if you like. So you can choose what instrument it is, or you can choose to auto detect. It should auto detect drums for me. For the style, you can choose balanced, warm, or up front. I'll choose balanced. For the intensity, you can do low, medium, and high. Let's do medium. So what you do is you choose what you're going for, you hit next, and then you press play, and Neutron takes the information that it's given and comes up with a preset that is good for that instrument or that group of instruments in this case. Okay, so before I do that, let me just go ahead and unbypass Neutron here. Go to the track assistant, choose all the same parameters, hit next, and I'll play a little bit of my drum track. And then when you're all done, you can choose to accept these parameters, which I will. Now, there's several different modules within Neutron. There's a gate, there's an EQ, there's a transient shaper, there's an exciter, and 2 compressors, which is really cool. Let's start with the EQ. I'm going to skip the gate for now. We'll use that on the vocals later, though. So the EQ is a dynamic EQ. I really, really love this EQ. It's already come up with some sort of like a little curve for us here. And for each of the plugins up here, you can adjust the wet-dry balance. So you can actually parallel process any of these plugins, which is really, really cool. Like maybe you like the EQ sound you're getting, but you don't want so much of it. You can pull this up and you're blending the dry signal with the wet signal. So that's really cool. And then you can also bypass each plugin or each module this way. So I like this little high-end boost they've added, but it's a bit much and it's constantly happening. So what you can do is for each of these EQ bands, you can click on that band. You'll see all the parameters, typical parameters you'll see for EQs down here. And you can turn on this dynamic mode. And it turns that band into a dynamic EQ, which essentially varies the amount of boost or gain on that band, much like a compressor would. It's like having a compressor on that band as well. And you can control the threshold for each band down here. So let's say I wanted to add a little more bottom end, a little more punch to the kick. What I could do, I am going to keep this high pass filter here. I'm a big fan of filtering out the sub-low end of drums just to keep the kick from being too boomy. I think of the kick drum as a kick drum, not as a bass drum. But let's say I want to take this low shelf here and boost it up a bit. But I wanted that boost to be a little more dynamic. We could turn on the dynamic mode for that band. And you can do a downward or upward motion. So downward is every single time you hear that kick hit in that range, it ducks down. We can also do the opposite. We can make it more expand it as opposed to compress it. So you only get that bass boost on the front end of the kick. Again, I'm just using it in a really simple way here. So that's the EQ. Maybe I don't want quite as much of that, so let's blend that in. Let's go over to the exciter. The exciter is really cool because it's a 3-band exciter. And I find this most useful on guitar, not so much on drums, but let's go ahead and kick in this upper band here because it only ended up using 2 bands. So let's like adjust this little XY pad here. And what this does is it gives you the choice between 3 different colors: warm, tube, tape, and retro. Retro is going to be very distorted. Warm is going to be the opposite of that. Tape and tube are going to have a little bit of fizz to it, a little bit of harmonic saturation and distortion in just some different ways. Find tube tends to be more crackly. Tape tends to be more hissy. It's just a matter of what you're going for and what range you're in as well. So let's maybe give this a little bit of a tape boost. You can adjust the amount of drive and also the blend between the drive and the dry signal. And if you just want to hear just this one band, you can solo the band right here. So we can use that to give the cymbals and the upper frequencies of the snare drum to give it a little bit of a presence boost, and then the mid-range. Kind of dirty up the mid-range a little bit if we want, and then the bass. Just a really subtle bass boost. You can also adjust the crossover for each of these. I really only want the low end to affect just more or less the more subby frequencies. And then that sort of keeps the snare drum fully within this middle band, most of it at least. Maybe without the bottom harmonic at least. So I like that boost, but what you can hear there when I A-beat it, it's a little much. So let's just blend the exciter in just a little bit of a boost, not too much of it. And then there's two different compressors that you can add in, and they're also multi-band compressors. You can kick in up to 3 different bands for these. Nothing's really atypical of any other compressor that you would see out there. It's there's two different ones. The vintage mode on these basically views it with just like VU meters, gain reduction meters, and then the other mode views it as like a chart, like a gain reduction chart. I don't know if it actually affects the tone. I'm assuming it does, but a lot of times when you use the track assistant, it'll stack both of these. It'll use 2 different levels of compression as opposed to just one single level of compression. Yes, that's really helping to give the drums a little bit more body, a little more smack, although I am going to pull it down a bit and just blend it in. Now, one thing that's really super useful on individual drums is the transient shaper. I am going to use a little bit of it here. It's a 3-band transient shaper. Let me turn on all 3 bands here. And one thing you can do with all these multi-band plugins is you can individually learn them. So I can hit learn here and then hit play, and it'll automatically adjust the crossover frequency of the 3 bands based on the material that I play through it. So it gives me a recommended crossover setup here based on what I put through it. So I've got like my high frequencies, mid frequencies, and lows. Now in the low range, I really don't want any extra punch, any extra transients. So I'm just going to leave the attack at 0 and the sustain at 0. So it's really essentially doing nothing. The mid range, I maybe want a little bit more hit, a little more attack for the mid range of the snare drum. So I'm just using a little bit of it, and you can choose 3 different modes: sharp, medium, and smooth. I'm gonna use the sharp since it's percussion. And the high end is really where a lot of the transient material comes through. It's a really easy way to make your drums really, really punchy is to increase the transients on the high end. And again, I just want a little bit of it, blend it a little bit better. Now, the Neutron plugin as a whole, you can bypass it. You can put it in a 0 latency mode, so it optimizes the latency. And obviously, that comes at a cost and quality to the plugin. There's a limiter you can add onto the end, so you can add a limiter onto it if your material is clipping and you want to intentionally hit it with a limiter. You can choose 3 different modes for it. You can also test out your source material in mono or in stereo. You can flip the phase. You can swap the left and right channels. And another thing I really like that's really cool is this width option. It actually adds a stereo width effect to it, and it basically enhances the stereo image. Now, I'm not going to use this on drums, but this will come in handy with vocals and with guitars. So let me just bypass this with and then without the drums a couple times so you can hear the before and after. So they're a little tighter, a little punchier. I did pull down the EQ a bit because it was a little too bright for my taste. So that's pretty good for drums. Let's mix in the guitars now. Yeah, let's give them a little more body with Neutron here. And let's do the same thing. I'll start with a starting point with the track assistant, and then we'll go from there. We'll use it as a starting point. For guitar, let's do upfront and medium intensity. Now, in the guitar world, too much high end is not a good thing. So I find that Neutron always tries to add high end to guitar. It's already bright enough. I really want more of the mid range to come through. I do like this boost, but I'm gonna make more out of it. I like this boost as well, but we'll make a little more out of that. If anything, I'll go ahead and like filter out some of the high end in the guitar. And then we'll turn on the dynamic mode. Same thing for the low end. So it gives it a little bit more body. The compressor. I think we can hit this a little harder. Let's pull the thresholds down. And if we kick in our high frequency compressor as well, we can kind of tame some of that high frequency material. It's a little more pumpy, a little more pumpy sounding there. The exciter is really cool for guitar. I'm going to go ahead and turn all three bands on and relearn it. Yeah, this one's really useful for if you've got a guitar that kind of sounds flat, you can really give it like a presence boost. And when I say a presence boost, I don't mean like a high frequency presence boost. I like using like a mid-range presence boost. So as a matter of fact here, I think I'm just going to go against what the learn mode wanted. I'm going to boost the mid-range quite a bit. And you can do it as much or as little as you want. I just find it really useful to just saturate the guitars a little bit. The guitars are already heavily distorted, so they don't necessarily need to be too oversaturated. That's all we're going to use for the rhythm guitar, although let's play with the width knob here. Let's give this a shot. So that really, really helps to take those stereo guitars and just give them a little more width beyond just the panning that I added on the tracks. I'm going to go ahead and kick in the limiter here, and you can adjust the ceiling right here. So I'm going to test my guitars in mono to make sure that they're not canceling each other out too much. Let's try that with the drums. All right, so the only module that I haven't shown off yet is the gate module, and I find this incredibly helpful for vocals because I find that using a gate on vocals can help to get rid of some sort of breaths in between phrases and also get rid of any sort of noise or hiss or hum or anything in the signal in between phrases. So let's try this out on the lead vocals. I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing before. I'll just hit the track assistant. Let's do it up front, medium intensity. Let's give this a shot.
Why do we always have to say goodbye? Do we always have to live and die? Can't we live this life for each other?
And by the way, when I've been using the track assistant, if you hear any glitchiness or weirdness where the timing comes in and out of time, that's just a part of the process of using track assistant. Once the track assistant settles on a setting, the timing should be back to normal, whatever delay or latency you might be hearing. Also, on my vocals for this song, just a side note, if you hear a little distortion and a little bit of like a slapback echo, that's intentional. That was something I included on the tracks. Even the distortion is something I included on the tracks. So let's actually kick in the gate. It doesn't usually, I don't think it really ever kicks in the gate automatically. So let's kick in the gate here, and let's use the gate to cut out any sound between phrases, and we can also use it to sort of cut out breaths in between phrases as well.
Why do we always have to say goodbye? Do we always have to live and die? Can't we live this life for each other?
And there you go. You can see it. It gives you a readout of when it's gating and when it's not gating. You can adjust the threshold and the ratio down here. This gate's really cool because it's actually a 3-band gate. I haven't really used it much in multi-band mode. I've more or less just used it in a single band mode, but you can use it as a multi-band gate. So you can gate the high frequencies, but leave the low frequencies or the mid frequencies alone, which is really cool. For the EQ here, let's keep this high frequency boost. I'm fine with that, but let's kick in the dynamic modes for all of these bands. And I really find, let's pull this over to like 2K instead of 4K. I really find that kicking in dynamic mode really helps to make the EQ sound a little more balanced and a little less direct, and just overall, just in my opinion, improves the sound quality of the mix by not using a static EQ, but rather using a dynamic EQ.
Why do we always have to say goodbye? Do we always have to live and die?
Cool, I'll live with the compressor. The exciter I'm not going to use so much of, just a little bit.
Can't we live this life for each other?
And I may actually pull up the sibilance in the EQ quite a bit.
Why do we always have to say goodbye? Do we always have to live and die?
And if I want to give my lead vocals a little bit of width, just make them stand out a little bit more, make them just bigger sounding, we can add the width here.
Can't we live this life for each other? Oh, so many times I've told you.
Now, one of the things you can do is if you add a neutron plugin, say on the guitar here. I know in the last clip I added neutron to the guitars already, but I'm going to start from scratch here. If you add neutron to another track, you can actually make the two neutron plugins communicate with each other. It's mostly just on the EQ, not on the other plugins, but on the EQ plugin, you can click this masking button. And when you click this masking button, you get this menu where you can select other iterations of neutron. So in this case, let's put this on the rhythm guitar track. Now what you're seeing up here is the lead vocals up here, but then down here, you're seeing the EQ on the guitars. So you can hit play and you can see the masking between the two instruments.
Why do we always have to say goodbye? Do we?
And then you get this little sort of peaking area up here where you can see the most common areas where the two instruments are interacting and masking each other. So one cool thing you can do is if you find that, say, the vocals are, or the guitars are covering up the vocals, you can turn on this inverse link option. And let's say that I turn on band number 4. I can link the frequency of band 4. I can also inverse link the gain and attenuation. So let's say I want this to be boosted in the vocals. Well, we can have it reduced in the guitars. Likewise, we can do it over here too. If I want this to be boosted in the vocals, we can reduce it in the guitars, and so forth and so on. So you can improve your masking issues in between tracks, different tracks, with the Neutron's EQ on it.
We always have to live and die. Can't we live this life for each other?
So there's a lot of high frequency masking up here. So maybe I can kick in band number 7 here.
So many times I've told you, in so many ways I've shown you.
And I can inverse link the two bands to try to improve that masking. So that's a cool little feature that you can use. That it's actually quite difficult to use, I'll be honest, but it is a cool feature if you find that two instruments are not jiving well together and they're more or less covering each other up, they're masking each other. You can use some slight EQ changes just to try to bring both of them out in the mix. You're never gonna get 100% no masking, 100% isolation of the two instruments. It's just not going to happen. They're always going to share some frequencies that cause them to mask each other. But if you can improve it even just a little bit, that's an improvement. That's something that's good for the mix, to isolate the two instruments and make both of them stand out by making their frequency ranges not clash with each other. All right, guys, so that is my overall overview of the features of Neutron. A few things in terms of review and just my critique of it. I find that I don't really use the two compressors much, especially on vocals and guitar. I really don't use these compressors much. They're good, just transparent multi-band compressors, but I find myself using character compressors more. Like I find myself using like an LA2A plugin or an real LA2A hardware unit on vocals. I find myself using an LA3A plugin for guitar. For drums, I find myself using the API 2500 plugin as opposed to using these compressors. So they're good overall, just transparent compressors, but they're really nothing super special. The exciter, some of the modules just are a little too dirty for me. I like Ozone's exciter much better, but it's nice as like a track exciter, as opposed to using it on an entire mix. But you have to be really careful how much you use the exciter on buses and on tracks, because it really you can really quickly oversaturate an instrument or a bus in your mix and just cause the whole thing to just be too bright and just nasty and fizzly sounding. So a lot of times I don't use the exciter too much, maybe except on guitar, and then on my mastering I'll use the exciter within Ozone instead. Transient shaper, no complaints there. It's a very good alternative to, say, Logic's enveloper plugin. It's a better alternative. I find myself boosting the mid and high frequencies, the attack of the mid and high bands to really bring out the punch in drums. And if you want your drums to have a little more ring to them, you can pull the sustain up as well. Or if you want less ring, you can pull the sustain down. The gate's awesome, although I will say I use the RVox from Waves more for gating than I do this gate, but it's still a great gate. Don't get me wrong, it's still a great gate. It works really well for guitar gating as well. I often find myself gating the whole rhythm guitar bus as a unit as opposed to gating each individual guitar track. Another sort of criticism of Neutron is that it, kind of like Ozone, it's really a CPU hog. I mean, it's not nearly as bad as Ozone, but it is kind of a CPU hog. You'll find yourself not being able to use too many instances of it unless you have a really totally just rocking CPU, like an 8-core CPU or something. I'm working with just, it's an old Mac Pro tower with a quad-core multi-threaded CPU, so it's like 8 cores. But even then, I find myself again, that's one of the reasons why I use it on buses more than individual tracks, is use too many instances of it and it can just keep your session from running properly and stop up your session. But I mean, it is what it is. It's not, it's definitely, it's a powerful plugin, and it requires a lot of CPU power to use. So, but yeah, overall, my review is very positive of it. I mean, I liked Neutron, the first iteration of it. I really like Neutron 2 as well. There's a lot of new features in addition to just the interface looking nicer. So it's a really nice way to, and I find myself using it on instruments where I'm like, I'm not really sure how to mix this. If I get a weird synth or a weird instrument where I'm like, I'm not really sure how to approach this. I'll throw Neutron on it, use the track assistant, and it gives me a good starting point, and then I can come up with my own ideas from there. The one thing I would, again, stress, and I said this sort of at the beginning of the video, is don't think of Neutron as a plugin that you're going to use to just auto-mix everything. You're not going to drop Neutron on every single track, hit track assistant, and expect it to sound perfect. That's not what Neutron does. It gives you a rough starting point where you can come up with your own ideas and sort of move forward from there. Again, this is my Neutron rough, off the cuff, overview of its features. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.